My name is Tennis Instead. This is the 8-Sided Blog, and we're going to talk a little bit about the rehearsal process. I have heard a lot of directors say that rehearsals are unnecessary and that they're frivolous. I've heard a lot of directors and a lot of actors talk about how the rehearsal process can make performances feel stale, and you're doing it wrong. Let's talk about how it actually works, and let's talk about the benefits of rehearsing so you understand exactly what goes into this and what you can get out of it. Any given creative endeavor is going to involve a lot of different pieces of information flying around. And there's going to be too many to keep your focus on at any given point in time. Okay? So the way that we deal with that is by turning as much of the work that we're doing as possible into habit. We establish a baseline of habit in our work so that we can focus on the details that matter from moment to moment and the details that are going to make the biggest difference. And when it comes to acting, the things that we really shouldn't have to think about are, number one, what the text says in the first place, because it's written down, it's non-negotiable. So there's no reason to be harping on the creative choices there, okay? And yes, improvisation is a thing, but for the reasons that we're talking about here, improv actually hurts the specificity of a performance to a pretty large degree when that performance is well rehearsed. You can't improv with the degree of depth and with the degree of emotional layers and everything else that you can deliver a rehearsed performance on if you're rehearsing right. The first thing you need in a rehearsal process is to get off book. So before you even start, before you bring the actors together, make sure everybody knows that they need to put the text behind them. Have all the dialogue memorized, be ready to walk into a space and start exchanging that dialogue with other actors, okay? Once that's been established, you schedule the rehearsal, and the first thing that you want to work on is the blocking. You want to make sure that you know how the scene plays out geographically. Okay, so you've got a sense of the space, you've done your location scouting, you know what goes into it, the logistics of the scene, okay, what props you need and this and that, and you figure out with the actors the spatial relationships of what's happening. And you want to work that material until it starts to become muscle memory, until the actors can perform it without having to think about it, okay? And a lot of the time actors will take notes on what the geography of the scene is. So as you figure things out, make sure everybody's got the information they need, make sure they can go home and work on it and replay it in their minds and, and develop their intuition for the flow of events and how things actually play out. It's important to note as you work through this process that sleep is a really essential aspect of habit building. Just like when you're working a muscle, you don't grow when you're actually doing the thing. You don't grow muscle mass when you're pumping the iron. You grow the muscle mass when you go to bed and you rest after you pump the iron, because now your muscles know what they need to do. It's the same with acting, okay? You work the scene, you develop the geography, you practice it enough so that the actors start to build a sense of the spatial geography and they can kind of motor through it without having to think too much about it. You move on at that point. You practice a different scene, you rehearse something else, and then the actors go home and they sleep, and when they come back, it's going to be buried a little bit deeper into their neural networks. It's going to be dug in, and they're going to be able to go ahead and perform that scene without as much conscious effort. Okay? Once you get to that point, you get to start playing. Once you get to the point where the whole show is blocked out, you know the spatial relationships of everything that's going on, you can start playing these scenes and building a sense of muscle memory for the little details of exactly what's going on. Actors in that space, they can start really listening to each other because they don't have to think about where their feet are supposed to go or whether they're supposed to pick up the coffee mug or whatever the thing is. All that stuff is starting to become beat into their literally their brains. They're developing the muscle memory, which means they're developing the neural pathways to execute those skills without having to think about them, which means they can be thinking about other things now. And when you start playing that scene out, they're going to be listening that much more carefully to one another. They're going to be listening for the little passive-aggressive details, right, that one actor might be throwing at another, or they're going to be listening for the stakes of the scene in the way that they communicate to one another, and they're going to be pushing forward with their action and performing their side of the scene and their side of the conflict with a higher degree of specificity for what they're actually trying to do in the details. All those details start to compound, and when you find something that you really like, when you make a discovery that clearly enhances the film objectively, then hammer it in, right? Rehearse it until it becomes muscle memory, and let the actor start finding the details in the detail that you found for as much rehearsal time as you can get. So what I'm saying is, you know, there's no such thing as too much rehearsal, because if you're doing it right, it's like an onion. If you're doing it right, you're always finding not just new details, but new levels of detail in the script. And at a certain point, the performances become so nuanced and so detailed and so highly specific that the audience stops being able to tell the difference between real life and what they're watching. The spectacle that you are presenting the audience with becomes so grounded in the specificity and so profound through that specificity that the audience is just blown away. And you can watch those performances and watch them and always find new things in them, because there's more information in those performances than the audience is remotely prepared to process. Okay? That's what rehearsal does for you. That's why I recommend it. I had one person, I have a friend, a director in England who's more established than myself and has been very supportive of my work. And he showed Fast Times Acceleration to some of his colleagues because he was impressed, and I was grateful for that. One of the colleagues insisted that the whole thing was improvised. And my friend Mark told his colleague that there's no way that's improvised. You can't possibly improvise a script like that with the level of timing, with the level. He knew that the level of specificity was too high, in other words, for the actors to have just come up with it on the fly, because nobody's that funny and nobody's that smart in real life. And to the other people watching it, it just was too honest and too real and too raw and too loose to be otherwise. And he made a bet, and I made him some money that day. Compensate your actors for rehearsal. Make sure that you rehearse your actors. Give them the opportunity to work with one another and get past the basic impulses that are present in the text, so that they can start really, you know, interacting with one another on a more finely tuned level. They can start pushing and pulling for their missions in ways that surprise you, and they can start finding the kinds of details that breathe life into their performances. Oh. And don't assume that any actor is too good for this process, because every performance can be stronger. Every performance can be better. And you owe it to your project, and you owe it to your cast to give yourself the opportunity to discover that. This has been the 8-Sided Blog. Thank you very much for watching. If you like these videos, please give me a thumbs up. Please make sure to click like and subscribe so that you are aware when there's another 8-Sided Blog hitting YouTube. And I will see you next week. Thank you for watching. Take care.